Hey there, you're looking kind of cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out all my other socials. Enjoy. The silk glided across his skin, a whisper of fabric that sent shivers down his spine. Maximiliano's fingers trembled as he fastened the last button on the blouse, his heart racing with a mixture of exhilaration and fear. The bedroom mirror reflected an image both foreign and achingly familiar. A figure draped in soft curves and delicate lace, framing features that seemed to soften before his eyes. He took a deep breath, steadying himself against the dresser. This was just an experiment, he told himself. A harmless diversion, nothing more. But even as the thoughts formed, a part of him knew they rang hollow. Maximiliano had always felt different, though he could never quite put his finger on why. Growing up, he'd gravitated towards activities and interests that didn't quite align with what was expected of him. While other boys roughhoused on the playground, he found solace in quiet corners with books or art supplies. His father's attempts to interest him in sports fell flat, much to the older man's poorly concealed disappointment. But it wasn't until college that Maximiliano stumbled upon the key that would unlock a lifetime of confusion. A drama elective required him to don a dress for a Shakespeare production. The moment he slipped into the costume, something clicked into place. A sense of rightness he'd never experienced before. Now, years later, that same feeling washed over him as he stood before the mirror. The blouse was a deep burgundy, complementing his olive skin tone. He'd paired it with a flowing black skirt that swished enticingly around his calves. Before he could second-guess himself, Maximiliano reached for the small makeup bag hidden at the back of his closet. With hands steadier than he expected, he applied a light coat of foundation, followed by a hint of blush on his cheekbones. A swipe of mascara made his dark eyes pop. Finally, he reached for the lipstick, a bold red that made his heart skip a beat. As he pressed his lips together to even out the color, Maximiliano caught his reflection's gaze. For a moment, he didn't recognize the person staring back at him. The face in the mirror was softer, more open. There was a light in those eyes he'd never seen before. "Who are you?" he whispered, barely aware he'd spoken aloud. The figure in the mirror didn't answer, but something stirred deep within Maximiliano's chest. A name floated to the surface of his mind, unbidden, but feeling inexplicably right. "Andrea," he breathed, testing the sound of it. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Maximiliano startled, nearly knocking over the makeup bag in his haste to hide the evidence. "Max, you home?" His roommate's voice carried through the wood. Just a minute," Maximiliano called back, frantically wiping at his face with a tissue. He stripped off the blouse and skirt, shoving them unceremoniously into the back of his closet. Heart pounding, he threw on a t-shirt and jeans before opening the door. "Hey, man, didn't mean to bother you," his roommate said, leaning against the doorframe. "Just wanted to see if you wanted to grab a beer later." Maximiliano forced a smile, praying his friend wouldn't notice the faint traces of makeup he'd missed in his rush. Maybe another time? I've got a big project due." "No worries. Catch you later." As the door closed, Maximiliano sagged against it, letting out a shaky breath. That had been too close. He needed to be more careful. But even as the adrenaline faded, he couldn't shake the memory of how right it had felt to see Andrea staring back at him from the mirror. It was a feeling he knew he'd be chasing again, no matter how much he tried to convince himself otherwise. Over the next few weeks, Maximiliano found himself creating more and more excuses to spend time alone in his room. Each time, he would carefully lock the door before reaching for the hidden stash of clothing that was slowly but steadily growing. He told himself it was just stress relief, a harmless way to unwind after long days at his accounting firm. But deep down, he knew it was becoming more than that. With each transformation, the disconnect between his daily life and these private moments grew sharper. At work, Maximiliano felt like he was play acting, going through the motions of a life that didn't quite fit. He found himself daydreaming during meetings, imagining how it would feel to walk into the office in heels and a pencil skirt. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. It was during one of these moments of distraction that his boss caught him off guard. "Earth to Maximiliano," she said, snapping her fingers in front of his face. Did you hear anything I just said? He blinked, feeling heat rise to his cheeks. I'm so sorry, Ms. Reeves. Could you repeat that? She sighed, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. I asked if everything was all right. You've seemed distracted lately? Is there something going on that I should know about? Maximiliano opened his mouth to offer a bland reassurance, but found himself hesitating. For a wild moment, he imagined telling her everything, about the clothes hidden in his closet, about the name that felt more and more like his own with each passing day. Instead, he mustered a weak smile. Just a bit tired, I think. I'll make sure to get more rest. Ms. Reeves didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded. See that you do. I need you at your best, Maximiliano. You're one of our most promising young accountants. The praise should have filled him with pride. Instead, it left a hollow ache in his chest. He wondered how Ms. Reeves would react if she knew the truth, if any of his colleagues would look at him the same way if they saw him as Andrea. That evening, Maximiliano found himself standing in front of the mirror once again. This time, he'd chosen a soft green sweater dress that hugged his curves in a way that made his breath catch. He'd gotten bolder with the makeup, experimenting with eyeshadow and contouring techniques gleaned from late-night YouTube tutorials. As he gazed at his reflection, the disconnect between his two lives felt more pronounced than ever. In that moment, he realized he couldn't keep compartmentalizing forever. Something had to give. With trembling fingers, he reached for his phone. Before he could talk himself out of it, he opened a search engine and typed, "How do I know if I'm transgender?" The results that popped up made his head spin. Forums filled with personal stories, medical websites explaining gender dysphoria, support groups, and therapists specializing in gender identity issues. It was overwhelming, but also strangely comforting. He wasn't alone in this. Maximiliano spent hours reading, alternating between moments of intense recognition and paralyzing fear. By the time he finally crawled into bed, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions and half-formed plans. The next few weeks passed in a blur of self-discovery and cautious exploration. Maximiliano found himself spending more and more time online, connecting with others who shared similar experiences. He learned new terminology, devoured books on gender theory, and slowly began to accept that what he was feeling went far beyond a simple fascination with women's clothing. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that he stumbled upon a local support group for transgender individuals. The idea of attending filled him with equal parts terror and longing. Could he really take that step? After days of internal debate, Maximiliano finally worked up the courage to go. He arrived at the community center 30 minutes early, parking his car a block away to avoid being seen. His palms were sweaty as he approached the building, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But something stronger propelled him forward. As he pushed open the door and stepped into the warm light of the meeting room, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in his life, Maximiliano found himself in a space where he didn't have to pretend. The group leader, a kind-faced woman named Elena, greeted him warmly. "Welcome. Is this your first time joining us?" Maximiliano nodded, unable to find his voice for a moment. When he finally spoke, the words came out in a rush. I don't know if I'm still figuring things out." Elena's smile was understanding. "That's perfectly okay. We're here to support each other no matter where you are in your journey. Why don't you have a seat? We'll be starting soon." As other attendees filtered in, Maximiliano found himself relaxing incrementally. The atmosphere was warm and accepting, filled with quiet conversations and genuine laughter. When the meeting officially began, he listened with rapt attention as others shared their stories. Some were further along in their transitions, speaking confidently about hormone therapy and legal name changes. Others were just beginning to explore their identities, their voices tinged with the same mixture of hope and fear that Maximiliano felt. When it came time for him to introduce himself, Maximiliano hesitated. He thought of the name that had been echoing in his mind for weeks now. "I'm Andrea," he said softly, the name feeling both foreign and perfectly right on his tongue. She, her pronouns, I think. I'm still pretty new to all of this. The simple act of speaking those words aloud felt monumental. As the meeting continued, Andrea, for she was beginning to think of herself that way more and more, felt a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. Over the next few months, Andrea became a regular at the support group meetings. With each passing week, she grew more comfortable in her identity, slowly shedding the shell of Maximiliano like an ill-fitting suit. At home, she began living as Andrea full-time, reveling in the freedom to express herself authentically. She experimented with different styles of clothing, finding joy in simple things like the swish of a skirt or the click of heels on hardwood floors. But the workplace remained a source of anxiety. Andrea knew she couldn't keep up the charade of being Maximiliano forever. But the thought of coming out to her colleagues and clients filled her with dread. What if she lost her job? What if her years of hard work were suddenly overshadowed by people's prejudices? It was Elena who finally gave her the push she needed. After one particularly emotional support group session, she pulled Andrea aside. "You've come so far," Elena said gently. "But I can see how much it's weighing on you, living two separate lives. Have you considered taking the next step?" Andrea sighed, running a hand through her hair, which she'd been growing out much to the confusion of her coworkers. "I want to, God, I want to, but I'm terrified. What if I lose everything?" Elena's eyes were kind but firm. "What if you gain everything? Andrea, you've already done the hardest part, accepting yourself. The world can be challenging, yes, but it can also surprise you. Give people a chance to see the real you." Those words stayed with Andrea long after the meeting ended. As she drove home, she found herself taking a detour, ending up in the parking lot of her office building. The windows were dark, the lot empty save for a few cars belonging to the custodial staff. Andrea sat there for a long time, staring up at the place that had been such a big part of Maximiliano's life. She thought about the colleagues she'd worked alongside for years, the clients she'd built relationships with. Could she really risk it all? But then she thought about the freedom she felt at home, the joy of finally living authentically. She thought about the support group, about Elena's words of encouragement, and she realized that the real risk would be continuing to live a lie. With a deep breath, Andrea made her decision. She would come out at work, consequences be damned. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever was. The next morning, Andrea woke before her alarm, a mixture of nerves and determination coursing through her veins. She'd spent hours the night before carefully selecting her outfit, a tailored navy blue pantsuit that was professional, yet undeniably feminine, paired with modest heels and subtle makeup. As she stood before the mirror, Andrea barely recognized the person staring back at her. Gone was the ill-fitting mask of Maximiliano. In its place was a woman who looked poised, confident, and utterly terrified. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection, willing herself to believe it. The drive to work felt surreal. Andrea's hands shook slightly as she gripped the steering wheel, her mind racing through all the possible scenarios that might unfold. Would her coworkers be shocked, disgusted, supportive? She'd rehearsed what she wanted to say 100 times, but now all the carefully planned words seemed to evaporate. As she pulled into the parking lot, Andrea spotted Ms. Reeves' car already in its usual spot. Her heart rate kicked up another notch. She'd requested a meeting with her boss first thing this morning, knowing that starting there was the most professional approach. Taking a deep breath, Andrea stepped out of her car. The click of her heels on the pavement seemed impossibly loud in the quiet morning air. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked towards the building with as much confidence as she could muster. The security guard at the front desk did a double-take as she approached, confusion evident on his face. "Good morning, Frank," Andrea said, her voice higher and softer than its usual register. Recognition dawned in the guard's eyes, followed quickly by surprise. To his credit, he recovered quickly. "Good morning, Andrea?" she supplied gently. "It's Andrea now." Frank nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Have a good day, Andrea." That simple interaction gave Andrea a much-needed boost of confidence as she made her way to the elevators. She received a few curious glances from early arriving coworkers, but no one stopped her or made any comments. As the elevator doors opened on her floor, Andrea's resolve wavered for a moment. She could still turn back, go home, pretend this was all some elaborate prank. But the thought of retreating back into Maximiliano's life felt suffocating now. With trembling fingers, she knocked on Ms. Reeves's office door. "Come in," called a familiar voice. Andrea stepped inside, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Ms. Reeves must be able to hear it. Her boss looked up from her computer, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to shock as she took in Andrea's appearance. "Maximiliano?" she asked, clearly struggling to make sense of what she was seeing. "Actually," Andrea said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it's Andrea now. I'm transgender. I've been transitioning privately for some time now, and I've reached a point where I need to live authentically in all aspects of my life, including work." Ms. Reeves was silent for a long moment, her face unreadable. Andrea's stomach churned, certain she was about to be fired on the spot. But then, slowly, Ms. Reeves's expression softened. "I suspected something was going on with you. I never imagined. Well, thank you for trusting me with this, Andrea. It can't have been easy." Andrea felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness in her boss's voice. You're not upset?" Ms. Reeves shook her head. "Surprised, certainly. But upset? No. You're still the same talented accountant I hired. Your gender doesn't change that." She paused, considering. "We'll need to inform HR, of course. There will be some logistics to work out. But Andrea, I want you to know that you have my full support." The tears Andrea had been holding back spilled over then. She fumbled in her purse for a tissue, laughing a little at her own emotional display. "I'm sorry, I was so scared." Ms. Reeves stood, coming around her desk to place a comforting hand on Andrea's shoulder. "You've shown incredible courage. Now, let's figure out how to make this transition as smooth as possible for you and the rest of the team." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of meetings and explanations. HR was brought in, policies were discussed, and plans were made for how to inform the rest of the staff and clients. Through it all, Andrea felt a growing sense of relief and validation. By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the office. Andrea braced herself as she made her way to the break room, unsure of what reception to expect. To her surprise and immense gratitude, most of her coworkers responded with support and acceptance. There were a few awkward moments and stumbled pronouns, but overall, the atmosphere was one of respect and even celebration. As the day drew to a close, Andrea sat at her desk, emotionally exhausted, but filled with a profound sense of peace. She'd done it! She'd taken this enormous step, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like her world was truly beginning for the first time. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "How did it go?" Andrea smiled, typing out a reply. "Better than I ever could have imagined. Thank you for giving me the push I needed." As she gathered her things to head home, Andrea caught her reflection in the darkened window of her office. The woman looking back at her was no longer a secret, no longer a part-time persona to be hidden away. She was simply Andrea in all her complexity and authenticity. Thanks for watching. The rest won't be viewable on YouTube, so check out Patreon if you want more. I hope you have a wonderful day, my cutie.